Alrighty, folks. Welcome on back to Lost Odyssey. Today, we are going to be going through the Hero Dream. We got a couple more. I am contemplating popping up a new save and running back through Ura to get the 5 that we're missing up here. And then adding them in just so that I don't have to worry about going back and getting them later. And then all we have to worry about is these here at the end. So let's get going with the hero. The hero was home from the war. He had performed gallantly on the battlefield, advanced to the rank of general, and made a triumphant entry into the village of his birth. The villagers welcomed him with a festive celebration. The grown-ups were treated to drinks beginning in the afternoon, and the children received sweet confections. The cattle and sheep in the pastures that supported the villagers' livelihood, whether because they were excited by the unusual commotion or were welcoming the hero in their own way, sent especially shrill cries reverberating into the blue summer sky. General, you are the pride of our village. Obviously full of pride himself, the head of the village thrust out his chest as he delivered his congratulatory address in the welcoming ceremony. To think that the foremost hero in the army came from this tiny village is so incredibly exhilarating and gratifying. I am sure our ancestors are overjoyed as well. The throng crammed into the village square burst forth with cheers and applause. According to the official figures released by the army the other day, General, you brought down at least 2,000 enemy soldiers with your own hand. A thunderous roar shook the square. Come to think of it, the population of this village is less than 1,000. This means, sir, that you managed to bury more than 2 of these villages worth of your own. How fortunate for us that you were not one of the enemy. If by any chance there had been a warrior of your caliber on their side, we'd all be resting in the hilltop graveyard by now. A few of the women frowned momentarily at this remark, but the men, full of liquor, responded with an explosive laugh. Sitting stage center, the general lightly stroked his dignified beard. No one present knew that this was his habit whenever he was perplexed. When he left his village to join the army, he was just an ordinary soldier, a long way from growing a beard. General, you are truly the savior of our army, and indeed of our entire nation. I understand you will be leaving for another battle tomorrow, but we all hope that you will thoroughly enjoy yourself on this rare visit to your birthplace. The village chief ended his greetings and withdrew to the wings, whereupon the village's #1 entertainer bounded onto the stage in the most comical way he could manage. "Dear General," he cried, running over to where the great man was seated and going down on his knees. "Oh, hear my plea." The general looked at him uncertainly. "Is there any possibility that you would lend me the sword at your side, if only for a moment?" Perplexed though he was by all this, the general, impelled by the audience's applause and cheers, handed the man his tasseled and jewel-encrusted sword. The man bowed deeply as the sword entered his outstretched hands, and again he cried, "My gratitude knows no bounds." Pretending to stagger under the weight of the sword, he came to the edge of the stage and held the weapon aloft. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, I will reenact the event that raised our dear general's fame to heights in a single bound." He then hacked 18 of the enemy into teeny tiny bits. The audience cheered wildly, and the man, with an exaggerated movements and commentary, swung the sword in a great arc. The audience knew exactly what he was doing. The general had not only made a name for himself for his strategic prowess, but was also widely acclaimed as a warrior on the battlefield. He did not rely solely on his weapons, but in the end leveled his opponents with his sheer physical strength. This, too, was a matter of the utmost pride for the villagers. "Here we go. 1 man down, 2 men down, flip the sword back, 3 man down, 4th man, slash diagonally right through the shoulder, 5th man's head goes flying, oof, then 3 at once, 6th, 7th, and 8th man, what a bother. I'll just skewer you like this." The man thrust the sword through 3 imaginary opponents, and the crowd went wild. The general, too, broke into a smile and applauded. When he was through clapping, though, he stroked his beard again. "I'm sure you can understand how I felt at the time, sitting up there on that stage," the old general says to Khayyam before taking a sip of water from his leather pouch. His magnificent beard is completely white. So distant are the past events he is recounting. Khayyam nods in silence, and the general continues as if mulling over every word. "The more you know about war, the more you feel that way." Sorry. I had a yawn right there. "I'm sure the villagers meant well. They just wanted to pay homage to their hometown hero. No, of course. They weren't being the least bit malicious. My village has the nicest people in the world, which is exactly why I found the whole thing so painful. I couldn't stand it after a while." Hacking 18 men to bits, the deeds of a hero are related in numbers. Surely the man who playfully swung the general's sword on stage that day could never have imagined the ones who lost their lives on the battlefield. The agonized expressions on their faces, the curse in their eyes as they stared into nothingness. But that's all right, too. People who live peaceful lives don't have to know about such things. That's what people like us are for, to keep their lives far away from the battlefields. Don't you agree? Thanks to us and our killing of enemies, the people we're supposed to protect don't have to know anything about the bloodiness of war. Unless you believe that, what is the point of people killing each other? Khayyam says nothing, without either affirming or negating the old general's words. He stares vaguely at the general's troops. "What did you say your name is? Khayyam? I suppose you've killed more enemy soldiers than you can begin to count." "There's no way I could count them all." "I thought so. You have a flawless build, the kind that can only be tempered on the battlefield. Only a man who has survived one battle after another can carry himself the way that you do, with complete naturalness. How does a man like you find himself driving a horse cart over a mountain pass?" Khayyam is ready to leave without answering if the old man asks him such a question. But the general inquires no further into Khayyam's background. Instead, there's a sense of relief in the smile he bestows on the sight of Khayyam resting his horses on the pass. "I was 16 the first time I went into battle. After that, I just kept running from one fight to another until I made it all the way to general. At first, I remembered the faces of the men I crossed swords with and killed. Even if you don't try to remember them, they get carved into your memory. I had terrible nightmares, and try as I might, I could never seem to wash off the stench of the blood that splashed on my face and hands. That was a hallucination, of course, but it got so bad that I once spent a whole night in a river trying to wash myself off." The general paused a moment to think about his story, then went on. "But after a while, you get used to it. You get used to fighting and killing over and over again. Your body and your mind and your heart, you just get used to it. That's how people are. So I stopped having nightmares. I killed all of the enemy soldiers I could lay my hands on, and I forgot every one of their faces. It's the same for you now too, Khayyam, isn't it?" "Maybe so." "It's like a curse. If you don't get used to it, your heart breaks. On the other hand, if you do get used to it, your heart possibly ends up breaking someplace deeper down." The general casts a fond glance towards his resting troops. Then slowly shifting his gaze far down to the foot of the mountain, he says, "So that's what it was like for me back then, when I returned to my birthplace in triumph." For the final event of the welcoming ceremonies, several children mounted the stage. And now, in honor of our hero, the children will present to the general a floral wreath more marvelous than the general's medal there ever was. The audience went wild again. When the children put the wreath on his neck, the general favored them with a warm smile. The first honest smile from the heart he had managed since climbing onto the stage. And finally, as a special treat for the general, who has been galloping from one battlefield to the next, far from his native place, the children's chosen representative will read his own original composition, spelling out the joys of peaceful life of the village. With a look of grim intensity, a small boy, barely old enough to go to school, unfolded his composition and, gripping it in two hands, began to read aloud from it, straining to make himself heard. First, I'm going to write about one of the nicest things that happened to me. At my house, we have a pasture with lots of cows and sheep. One cow had a baby 2 days ago. I helped my daddy by stroking the cow's back with a handful of straw while she was having the baby. That makes the cow warm up so it's easier for her to give birth. The baby was born just before the sun came up. It was a tiny baby, but it could already stand on its own legs. The baby. Wow. I'm going to take care of this baby until it gets big. Dear little calf, hurry and grow up, okay? The general had tears in his eyes. Now, I'm going to write about one of the saddest things that happened to me. That was when my grandma got sick and died. She was such a nice grandma. I know her sickness made her feel bad, but she was always smiling when I was around. So she let me hold her hand when she died. I watched her face the whole time because I knew I wouldn't be able to see her anymore, and I wanted to remember her even after I grew up. She just kept smiling and smiling for me right to the very end. That's why she's always smiling when I think of her. Are you looking down on me from the sky, Grandma? I will never forget you as long as I live. Tears were streaming down the general's face. When the ceremony ended, the general left his village and headed for the town where the army headquarters were located. There, he wrote a long letter to the king and gave his sword to his most trusted lieutenant. The general had decided to retire. There was a big surprise to me, as it was to anybody, but when I heard that little boy's essay, it occurred to me, what makes us really human is to celebrate each life that comes into this world and mourn each life that is lost. I didn't need medals anymore. I didn't need the honor of being allowed into the presence of His Majesty anymore. I wanted to be a real human being again. As a result, overnight, I went from being the village hero to being reviled as a traitor. The general turns his face to Chaim and asks, "So are you going to mock me as a coward who ran away from the battlefield, or blame me for being a deserter who betrayed his own patriotism?" Chaim turns a gentle smile on the old man. "Neither," he says. "As a soldier, you made the wrong decision, but as a human being, you made the right one." The general strokes his right beard and says, "My habit has changed too. Nowadays, I find myself stroking my beard when I'm embarrassed." The two men looked at each other and smile. "Okay, back to work," says the general, standing with a grunt. He calls out to his troops, "All right, men, it's all down here from here. Let's give it one last push and get back to the village before sunset." The troops, quote unquote, under the general's command consist of 30 sheep, not one of whom is likely to take a person's life. "Tell me, Chaim, are you planning to go back into battle at some point?" "I don't really know," he replies. "I'm content with herding sheep for now," the general says. "I don't have the least regret for the decision I made that day. It would make me happy to think this could be a kind of lesson to you." With his parting remark, the general turns away from Chaim and begins walking. The sheep amble along after him in newly reformed ranks. Standing at attention, the general waves his right arm and raises his right. Standing at attention, the general raises his right arm and waves his troops on. "Forward, march!" The command he had once delivered to tens of thousands of men on the battlefield now echoes pleasantly among the mountains of his native village. That was a happy one for once. Well, at least what I consider to be a happy one. I mean, yeah, you're so accustomed to war, so accustomed to death and brutality that you come home and you're heralded as a hero, and you hear about all the little everyday things that make people happy or sad. Yeah, that could change anybody's mind about their chosen profession, not just a general's. So yeah, no, I definitely agree with the general. I probably would have stopped too. But that is going to end today's episode and today's story. Hope you folks enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button down below. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and checking out some of my other content. And as always, I will catch you folks in the next episode. Stay frosty out there.